Terrific. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Julie. My name is Jane Hager, and I work with Telecommunication Access Maryland. We are an agency that is part of the Maryland Department of Disabilities. I'm here today co-presenting with our Executive Director, David Bahar. And for our blind audience, I am an older white woman. I have gray hair and I wear two behind the ear hearing aids. Um, I identify myself as deaf, and that's with a small d. And in our presentation today, we're going to go into what a lot of the terms used within the deaf and hard of hearing community mean. On our slide, currently we have Maryland Department of Disabilities and their logo, which has the Maryland flag as background, Telecommunication Access Maryland, and that logo, which is also of a flag, and Maryland Accessible Telecommunication with their logo, our logo, which has symbols of a phone, a finger on a touch screen, and a cell phone. These slides coming up are mostly all text bulleted text for information are really just for our guidance as presenters. So no worries about that. When we get to a slide that has more graphic, we will happily explain that. So David, if you would like to introduce yourself, and then we will move on to the next slide, which I'll take that one, and then we'll kind of go back and forth on that. So David, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Jane. My name is David Bahar, and I am the director of the Telecommunications Access of Maryland. That agency is housed under the Maryland Department of Disabilities. And we provide relay services and also accessible telecommunication equipment. I am a deaf man. I am white. I have brown hair. I'm medium height. And it's wonderful to be here with you and to share our knowledge with you. And back to you, Jane.
Thank you. Could I get the next screen? Thank you. Maryland Accessible Telecommunication. I wanted to give a little bit more background of about what this program does, which is providing accessible telecommunication devices to qualifying Maryland residents. That means that individuals are at least 3 years old, they have a verifiable disability, and they struggle to access telecommunication. And telecommunication anymore means that we're communicating not just by phone, but by text message, email, and video phone. Devices that we provide are often internet-based, but we also still provide landline phones. We also provide any needed accessories. So if an individual needs a mount because they're in a wheelchair or a hospital bed, or they need a specialized switch, we can provide that as well. There's no cost for our services. The equipment is free. However, it is considered a loan through the state. This means that it's still state property, which is to the individual's advantage because we take care of anything that goes wrong with it by providing a 3-year warranty. To apply for the MAT program, you can access our online application at mat-apply.org or give us a call at 410-767-7253. We're happy to mail applications out. You can also request applications by email at mat.program1@maryland.gov. And on this particular slide, there is a QR code for access that will take you to the online application process. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we have several terms used in the deaf and hard of hearing community to identify people with hearing loss. And that includes hard of hearing, hearing impaired, hearing loss, deaf with a small d, deaf with a capital D, late deafened, Deafblind, and that's a small d, a hyphen, and a small b for blind, but also deafblind in capital D, followed by a capital B in blind as one word. So there's lots of different terminology going on. We want to give you background about what these mean, kind of clarify where we're coming from. And then further into the presentation, we're going to talk about communication tips. This is extremely important. And then after that, we'll go into more of the technology accessibility needed for this community. Because all of these things, you as professionals and people working with people who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind, you're going to need this, this whole picture to really provide good services. Next slide, please. And David, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next few slides to sort of define the terminology. And then at the slide for the deafblind video, then we'll turn it back to me. So thank you, David. Take it from here.
And this is the interpreter. Can you give me one moment to adjust my screen, please?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is David, and this is the capital D deaf. So this refers to people who share a language, American Sign Language, who share a culture, and ASL is considered their native language. They've grown up with that language. Sign language around the world is not the same. There are a variety of sign languages used throughout the world. Even within the United States, American Sign Language is very different from British Sign Language, and it's not a common language that can be understood between those two countries. So there are different sign languages throughout the whole world with different grammars, structures, syntax, vocabulary, and all the things that make it a language, which is really cool. Next slide, please. If we're talking about lowercase d deaf, we're talking about the medical perspective and audiological perspective of someone who does not have hearing or has a hearing loss. If it becomes severe enough and that person loses auditory function without any kind of support, they may rely on hearing aids or speech reading or technology. These people do not share a culture and language the way the capital D deaf people do. These people identify more closely with hearing people, which is what we call all of you. And English is typically their primary language, not ASL. So for deaf people who use different languages and how they express themselves, deaf people who use American Sign Language to express themselves natively are considered capital D deaf. And I'm sorry, this is the interpreter. I need to, can you see me? Can you see me?
Yes, I can.
I'm sorry to interrupt. David, you're signing like down half off the screen and I can't see you clearly. Can you give me one moment, please, to also adjust so I can see my co-interpreter? I apologize for the interruption to the webinar. Just. Okay. Thank you. You had just said that, he's asking me where did I interrupt? Where did I stop interpreting? You had just said that people who express themselves natively with American Sign Language are capital D deaf and lowercase d deaf are not, it's not the same group. Right. So the lowercase d deaf really focuses more on the medical condition and the audiological condition of having reduced or severe or profound hearing loss. When it becomes severe enough, the person isn't able to function without some type of support, such as a hearing aid or speech reading assistance or other technology. That group typically uses spoken English, and they identify themselves as hearing. Now, with that group, they may use different gestures to assist in communication. For example, signing English, which is the use of signs and may include features of American Sign Language, but it is not considered American Sign Language. It follows the grammatical structure and word order of the spoken English language. And they may use that sign language to support their own vocal communication, something we call SIMCOM, which is simultaneous communication, or some other system of communication. Another system might be cued speech, where there are particular hand shapes used to support speech reading. Next slide, please. Late deafened. So late deafened refers to people who have grown up and lived their lives as hearing people. And when they reach older age, they start to lose their hearing. And they may try to use speech reading, possibly with support. They may decide to have a surgery and use a cochlear implant to aid in better hearing. They may use a hearing aid to support residual hearing. Their ability to pick up sign language often depends on the individual, and they may decide to learn sign language or some other communication method. But they've grown up and lived their entire lives as a hearing person, and it can be very isolating for them to leave that community. Next slide. Deafblind, please. So this group of people is people who are both deaf and blind, and they may use American Sign Language or sign language. It's not always tactile, or they may not always understand Braille, and the ability to read Braille is not necessarily as common as you might think. They may use sign support by a method called protactile communication, which is sign language with additional environmental, auditory, and visual information communicated through the hands so that they're aware of what's going on. The person who uses protactile is much more aware of the environment than communicating. And some may also use hearing aids or cochlear implants. Some of them are able to speak using their voices. Others may prefer to sign and not use their voices. So there is no one size fits all. And the cause for the hearing loss can vary. It can be a hearing loss that started at birth. It could be one that's over time, or there could be problems that develop later, or an incident, sickness, or accident that may cause the hearing loss. Some of the challenges that the community faces in general are access to services for communication, like relay services. A deaf-blind person who signs may be frustrated trying to communicate through a video relay, because while they're able to sign and be seen on a screen, the screen itself is not accessible to them because of their vision limitations. And so their access to communication services is not really equal to the access that other people experience. Now, the second word on this slide is deafblind with a hyphen. And you see that the two words are almost similar, but one has a capital D, capital B, deafblind. The other is hyphenated, lowercase d, lowercase b. And the difference can be who their community is, who the people relate to the most, and what cultures they identify with. The next slide will show you a good video of what protactile looks like and what that means. Let's go ahead and watch that video.
David, I'm gonna interrupt for just a second. Oh, yeah, let me interrupt for just a second. Yeah, I just wanted to say there was a question in the chat asking what speech reading is, and that's basically the same as lip reading with reading the expression. So that is a skill that is taught when I was in elementary school. I was taught speech reading, and that is a very rigorous form of therapy. And you're taught to identify where the tongue is, what the face is doing, while creating different sounds, the sounds that produce our language. And speech reading supports having hearing loss. For example, I wear 2 hearing aids. I also wear glasses. I will tell you, you can take away my hearing aid, but don't take away my glasses. I need to be able to see what you're saying. So that's what speech reading can do for you.
And I have
Okay.
glasses here too.
Yeah. So please, let's go ahead and show the video. Thank you.
Oscar Serna is speaking in a brand new language. Oscar is both deaf and blind, or deafblind. He works at Gallaudet University on a project tracking the evolution of a language for those who can't see or hear. This new language is called Protactile ASL. The ASL stands for American Sign Language, which uses visual signs for words and phrases. Protactile ASL communicates entirely through touch. For example, here's a sentence in ASL. Here's how Oscar would say the same sentence in protactile ASL. Historically, deafblind people communicated through American Sign Language, Braille, and fingerspelling, where each letter of each word is signed into a person's hand. Helen Keller, maybe the world's most famous deafblind person, used fingerspelling. But those are limiting, especially when deafblind people want to talk to each other. Protactile ASL emerged in the early 2000s as once isolated deafblind people began to form communities. Deafblind people have been adopting American Sign Language and adding gestures for things many languages don't have words for. For example, this tap on the hand is like nodding. The language has been evolving ever since.
Now, what's new in protactile is that we're seeing things that were used in visual sign language be transitioned from the use of space to the use of the perceiver's body.
Traditional theories of language defined it as something seen or heard, but protactile ASL proves that language can also be communicated through touch. And for the people speaking it, it allows for a life with richer communication.
Since I became protactile, all of the channels have opened up. Information flows freely. It's like going from dial-up to broadband.
Okay, that's just an amazing video about deafblind, and we'll get into a little further on information about the communication facilitator program that Telecommunication Access runs as well. So our next video and the graphic that we're seeing on the slide right now is talking about hard of hearing, deaf, capital D deaf, late deafened. You've heard a lot of different terms. And our graphic shows a rainbow of colors on a palette And the idea is, what's the difference? Well, it's personal, it's a choice, and it really depends on your perspective. And as I had introduced myself as a deaf person with a small d deaf, because I didn't grow up with the benefit of American Sign Language connected into that community, which is really, really sad for me. I've had to depend on hearing aids and lip reading, speech reading skills, lots of technology. I have not had that free, rich culture that is connected to the deaf community. I'm really fortunate now that as an adult, I chose to take the steps to learn American Sign Language. So I'm okay, fluent with it, not so great. It's more of a combination of my native English and ASL, again, a variation among all the other terms that we've just discussed. But, and so this next video really is a great summary of what that means in this community. So if we can play that, that would be great. Thank you.
Deafness is a spectrum. It's not just one definition. Someone like myself who's late deafened.
I am deaf in one ear and hearing in the other. Some people view me as a deaf person, some view me as hearing, but it's not one or the other.
I was born deaf. My father is deaf in one ear, so it's hereditary.
I'm the youngest of 5 siblings. The 3 youngest are deafblind.
I switch between deaf and disabled because I'm also a little person.
Being deaf is a big part of who I am, but that's not my only identity. I'm a person of color, biracial, half black and half white, and gay.
This is the condition I have. It's called Usher syndrome. It's a hearing and vision loss.
I grew up oral.
A lot of people consider me hard of hearing.
People do call me hearing impaired, but I'm not. I'm deaf. People think being deaf is a bad thing, but I see it as a positive thing. The culture, language, and history make me who I am today.
The deafblind community, tactile ASL, the use of space, the culture, all became a part of it.
I'm learning little by little about Protactor, and I can't wait to learn more. I am most comfortable with speaking English.
People with additional disabilities have to think about access and what they want. Do they know what they need?
Throughout educational years, I used note takers. I didn't have interpreters because I didn't know sign language. I didn't know ASL until I was 14.
I used cued speech and was mainstreamed throughout high school.
I went to a public school in the morning, then a deaf school in the afternoon. It was the best of both worlds. The instructors used ASL, which I found to be more inclusive.
I was in both deaf and hearing classes. I wore that bilateral hearing aid cinched across my chest. Very unpleasant.
I got a cochlear implant when I was 15 and went through intensive speech therapy.
In high school, I would sit to the far right, since I could hear on my left side.
In large group discussions where there's dynamic conversation, I use interpreters.
In my own experience, captioning and interpreting together are the most effective.
I want more of a long-term designated interpreter. Someone who knows me well, who knows my work. As a Black person, I want my interpreter's voice to match me. My culture can't be overlooked.
People automatically think deaf people are all the same, but that's not true. We have layers upon layers.
When you meet us, have an open mind and open heart.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a great video. Really summed it all up well. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about numbers and more, this part of the discussion is kind of more about hard of hearing people with some overall numbers as well. Yeah, so right now, if we look at numbers in the US, and this data comes from National Institute of Health, and it is a little bit dated. It's from 2016. So in the US, there are 30 million or 12.7% of our population age 12 and older that experience significant hearing loss. Now, that number 30 million is looking at people that have bilateral, meaning they have hearing loss in both ears. And if you remember, the one woman in the video said that well, a couple of people said that they were deaf in one ear, but could hear in the other. And that is a significant disability. So if you add those numbers plus the under 12 population the numbers come up to 48 million people in the US that have significant hearing loss. So how does that break down? 2 out of every 100 children have hearing loss. 1 out of 14 people under the age of 65 with hearing loss. 40% of people 65 to age 84. And when you get over 84, it's 2 out of every 3 people. Remember too, and we'll talk about this in another webinar coming up, about the higher incident among older people of vision loss. So this is where you get that dual challenge of hearing and vision loss for the deafblind. And that again would fall into the category of people who grew up in the auditory spoken English language, but being challenged with these significant sensory losses that throw them into a whole new world. Next slide, please. So when we talk about hard of hearing, we are looking at different ranges of loss. We talk about mild to moderate, moderate to severe, severe to profound, but usually hearing loss is a mix. I, for example, have one perfect tone, and that's the tone that sounds like a foghorn. So if everybody in the world sounded like a foghorn, I wouldn't miss a thing. But thankfully, that's not the way the world sounds. And so technically my loss is described as a ski slope loss. So I've got that perfect low tone, and then I do this race down to the bottom where the upper tones, I have profound loss. Another little bit of information, you've probably heard about a range called the speech banana when we talk about hearing loss. And that's the range of sounds where the words that we articulate using the vowels and consonants and for the S, which is clearly a very high frequency sound, and the vowels like U are very low sound. That's the range where most of our language occurs. And that's also the range where my severe to profound losses occur. So even though I have some really strong sounds that I can hear, and I speak of myself and my own experience, but this is the experience for a lot of people. I have sounds that I can hear. I am struggling all the time in utilizing hearing aids and speech reading and captioning and assistive listening devices so that I can get along in the hearing world. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, untreated hearing loss. This is considered a public health epidemic. There are 48 million people in the US that have serious hearing loss. And David, I don't know if you have any information offhand about how many of those people are using American Sign Language. Do you know offhand?
Of those 48 million, I believe Our best estimates are showing somewhere around 2 million.
Yeah.
It's difficult to assess directly though, because the census does not collect that data, for
Right.
example. There's no easy standardized way to track that information.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's a small percentage of people that actually use sign language. And just for me to get on my soapbox right now, if we all grew up spontaneously learning English and ASL, we would not be having this conversation or presentation right now. Hearing loss wouldn't be an issue. Communication would always be available to everyone. There would probably be a lot less isolation, depression, loneliness, and associated morbidities because people would always be able to communicate. That's all I'm going to say about that. Back to the slide presentation. So out of that 48 million people who have serious hearing loss, only about 28.8 million Americans who could benefit from using hearing aids. No, 28.8 million Americans could benefit from using hearing aids, but they don't. So why is that? And what's the significance? Could we look at the next slide, please? Why you should be concerned. Reading from the slide, current research suggests a correlation between untreated hearing loss, cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's, mental acuity, increased risk of falls, isolation, depression, and quality of life. And again, I'm speaking to the people with hearing loss who don't use sign language. These risks are there as well for people that do sign, but more so when we're talking about untreated hearing loss. Next slide, please. When we talk about the significance of the impact of hearing loss, and on this slide, we have a picture of a beautiful family of 4, mom and dad in the middle, 2 young children on each side. Everybody has perfect smiles, beautiful skin, lovely hair. And this is from Hearing Loss Association of America, which is a wonderful resource that if you want to get more information about hearing loss and resources and supports and that kind of thing, this is a great place to look. But the text on the slide says hearing loss has been shown to negatively impact nearly every dimension of the human experience, including physical health, emotional and mental health, perceptions of mental acuity, social skills, family relations, and self-esteem, not even to mention work and school. Additionally, even a mild hearing loss can cause a child to miss 50% of classroom discussion. That's a lot. Next slide, please. This slide has a really sweet picture. It says typical hearing loss is helped by hearing aids. And there's an adorable toddler, looks like he's maybe on a beach with a Hawaiian shirt on. The child has 2 behind the ear hearing aids. And if you look really closely, on the child's right side, it looks like there may be a cochlear implant. And beneath that picture is the side portrait of an elderly man with an in-the-ear hearing aid. And next slide, please. So again, we're talking about 28.8 million Americans who would benefit from hearing aids and don't use them. To break that down, 9 in 10 with mild loss don't use hearing aids. 6 out of 10 with a moderate to severe loss don't use hearing aids. 70% age 64 to 84 don't use them. A lot of them will say, oh, my hearing's not that bad. And that's because hearing loss is a very insidious kind of disability. It just creeps up without people realizing that they've got it. It really takes, on average, 10 to 14 years for the average person to acknowledge their hearing loss and actually do something about it. On this slide, there is a link to a great demonstration of what it sounds like to have those different kinds of hearing loss. I strongly encourage you at some point when you have time to take a look at that. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, why are all these people who could benefit from hearing aids not using them? Number one, it's about affordability. You're looking at costs between $1,000 and $6,000 for a pair of hearing aids. Lots of insurances don't cover costs for hearing aids at all. If you're lucky, you might find some insurance that will partially cover this. So it's a big investment, even though it's so important to your health. Second, it's kind of difficult to find the right service. And I know that sounds a little bit trite because there's audiologists everywhere, and you'll see hearing aid shops everywhere, and there's quite a distinction between those two things. An audiologist has an extensive educational background in diagnosing and fitting hearing aids. A hearing aid distributor. There's a term, I'm not remembering it quite correctly, but they don't have that background. They can also, after taking a series of kind of like online courses, can be licensed to distribute hearing aids, but you're not going to get the prescriptive fit and the ruling out of medical conditions that you would with an audiologist. There's also a lot to it. It's not just about getting the hearing aids, it's about knowing how to get used to them. It's about using other kinds of support to remedy your loss of hearing. There's also a lot of stigma associated with wearing hearing aids. People just feel that they're going to be looked down upon. It's not attractive, and people will think that they're old. And then again, people don't recognize that something is wrong. That hearing loss can creep up on people, and often they'll dismiss hearing loss as just part of the aging process, and there's nothing that can be done. Next slide, please. So that's my spiel about hearing loss and why it's important and what we should do about it and statistics and all of that. So let's talk about some ways that we can be meeting the needs of people who have hearing loss and are not using American Sign Language. When you're speaking with someone, you want to first make sure that you've got their attention. You want to make sure that the lighting in your room is good because, know it or not, people, whether they've had lip reading and speech reading lessons in the past, they're going to be looking a lot to facial features and doing some lip reading, even though they may not have a formal background in that skill. So if the lighting is behind them, it will cast the speaker's face into shadow. And if there's, not enough lighting in the room, that's a significant problem as well. When you're speaking with someone, it's very helpful if you frame the topic. So this means just saying, okay, we're going to talk about how to learn about how to activate captioning in a video conference call. That way, the person with hearing loss brain, as it's working really hard trying to keep up with the conversation and fill in all those missing gaps, has a smaller framework of vocabulary that it knows it's going to be pulling from pertinent to that conversation. Please use rules of clear speech and chunking. These are just good skills as presenters to have. I think that in the past couple of decades, we have seen an increase of the rate of speech. People have a lot to say, they're very excited, and they tend to ramp up their speech speed. When you're talking with someone with hearing loss, you want to slow down. Don't exaggerate, but speak clearly. And also do what's called chunking. This means that you're taking natural pauses between groups of words. It's really good presentation speaker skills for anyone in any group. There are techniques that people with hearing loss should use as well, but and one of those would be that they might say, I heard you say this, but I didn't catch that. Please honor that and only repeat what they miss. You don't have to repeat the whole thing, because that again may make them feel sort of inferior. You can clarify what's being said by using, that was B as in boy or D as in dog. If you learn to fingerspell and they know how to fingerspell, I find that to be very helpful. Whenever you're doing a presentation and using graphics, you want to take just a couple seconds and let that person, deaf or hard of hearing, look at the screen and then be able to refocus on the captioning or the interpreter. Next slide, please. The rooms, when you're talking about the acoustics and hearing loss, we all know what it's like to walk into a hard surfaced room and hear the sound bouncing everywhere. This is just excruciatingly worse for someone who's wearing hearing aids. So pay attention to the kind of room that you're meeting in. If it's got sound bouncing all over the place, look for something that's more acoustically friendly. Carpet on the floors, sound absorbing walls, lower ceilings, that kind of thing. You can tell the difference. If the room has windows, you want to make sure that whoever's talking isn't standing in front of them. If you've got shades, blinds, pull those to cut the lighting. Set some discussion rules in your presentation or your conversations where whoever is speaking raises their hand, gets everybody's attention, and then proceeds on with talking. This helps the people that are hard of hearing or deaf sort of shift, okay, that's who's talking, now I can follow them or pick up again with the interpreting. Next slide, please. Some technology solutions for people who are hard of hearing and deaf could include loop systems. Again, Hearing Loss of Association of America is a great resource to read more about what loop systems do. Basically, this is a system that uses infrared transmission that sends signals to hearing aids or cochlear implant that have a feature called a T-coil in them. This enables whoever is speaking, their voice is broadcast directly into the hearing aids. And through this process, background can also be muted, so only the speaker's voice is coming into the hearing aids, which is absolutely amazing. It increases understanding by about 40%, and that's huge. FM listening systems are very much like a loop system. They're just a personal kind of loop system that works with. It's usually an accessory that is you can buy additionally with hearing aids. Some other great technology: live transcribe, recorders that take voice and change it into a transcript. We'll look at those a little bit more later on. And then especially CART services. For any kind of presentation, CART services are just fantastic. You're all familiar with automated speech recognition, which is what Live Transcribe and many other kinds of recording speech to text kind of technology is. CART is very much like that. You're getting captioning, but it is human controlled. Sometimes CART services work in a combination of the ASR technology as well as the human interaction. The human interaction allows names to be put up and other kinds of things going on in the room to be more acknowledged. It's also more accurate. Live Transcribe is great, automated speech recognition, fabulous service, but it is not 100% accurate. And sometimes that few percentage of inaccuracy can make all the difference. It is never acceptable to substitute a automatic speech recognition software like that in a setting where you really want equal access. It's just, for example, if it were terminology in a classroom setting and the spelling in Live Transcribe was off, you could be looking at the difference of somebody being able to fail or pass a test. Next slide, please. Again, just assistive listening devices. You'll have this in the slide deck if you get it, that connection to hearingloss.org, Hearing Loss Association of America. I also want to mention that there are chapters. There's one in Baltimore and also in Montgomery, DC metro area. These are great resources for people with hearing loss, as well as for professionals to get more understanding of the challenges of this community. Next slide, please. This is a look. On the screen, we have pictures of a hearing aid with what is called a Roger pen, which is actually a pen-sized assistive listening device that is considered an FM listening system and works directly with that hearing aid. The pen is really a microphone. Someone a hard of hearing person is speaking with can hold the pen or can be placed in front of that person, and that microphone will pick up and broadcast directly to the hearing aid. Additionally, there's a clip next to that, which is really similar to what I'm wearing right now, which also acts as a streaming device and an intermediary in picking up sound and broadcasting it into hearing aids. And additionally, next to that, a picture of a similar streamer on a lanyard that has buttons on it for a computer, a microphone, and a phone. Again, the clips and the lanyard streamer are great intermediaries to give people with hearing loss better sound when they're using devices like their cell phone or participating in any kind of auditory presentation with a computer that is compatible with their technology. I'm using this right now, and again, I cannot emphasize what a difference it makes in my ability to participate in all these kinds of activities. Next slide, please. So just again, a review of accommodations under the ADA for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. We're talking about communication access, real-time translation, CART services. We are looking at captioning on all video, work, classroom, teleconferencing, Zoom, any kind of video platform. It is an equal accommodation to provide note takers, to do transcriptions, and of course, interpreting services. Next slide, please. A mention about cell phones as assistive listening technology. More and more, we are transitioning to depending on cell phones to get that kind of support, phones are becoming even personal amplification devices where they have the ability to act as a microphone, transmitting sound to earbuds. This can be sort of a temporary fix for people in lieu of the more expensive option of buying hearing aids. And they're also becoming more of the way that audiologists might want to tune someone's hearing aids and all that. Yeah, we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. This is an example of a cell phone working with live transcribe, and you can see on the cell phone the lettering, the captioning coming up on the screen to give that captioning access. This is also a great workaround I've used quite often. First of all, Live Transcribe is free. You can get it at Play Store and the Apple Store. You've got to be connected through data or an internet in order for it to work. There are some cell phones that have other features like recorders. Google Pixel is one example. And a recording feature on the Pixel will record what's being said and change it into a transcript so that you can read it while it's being spoken. And that's a great option if you don't have internet access. It's also a great option if you want to record a session and have it to refer to later in a few weeks or a month or a year. And as I was saying, I have often used Live Transcribe as a workaround. For example, if I've put a speaker phone on and turned my Live Transcribe on so that I can get a caption of the conversation. I've done the same thing in meetings where my captioning for some reason has failed. Speaker on, Live Transcribe on my phone, propped up next to my screen. It works. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, David, I'm going to give this back to you so you can go into video phone technology. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jane. This is David speaking. So video phones have made it possible with a technology called video relay service. And basically, this is a communication relay service for people who use American Sign Language, who are deaf. They're able to connect through an interpreter who then facilitates the telephone conversation, similar to what's happening here in this meeting now. The interpreter is able to connect to the hearing person on the other end of the phone line and facilitate that communication. Now, this technology and this service, I believe it's been around for about 25 years now. But until recently, we only saw deaf people able to visually connect to the interpreter. But there are new technologies now that allow both the deaf person and the hearing person to see each other as well as the interpreter on the same screen. And next slide, please.
I'm sorry, David, can we go back one? I think we can play that that clip, and I think it's just a really cool illustration of Wavelo.
I think it's 4 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, maybe just yeah, that's okay. We can skip it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we can skip it. Thanks.
We're going to be sending out the slide deck though, right?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. So when we send that out, the link will be included there. And if you're interested in watching that, you can. So the title of this slide is Real-Time Text. And real-time text is a new feature, and not brand new, but you know, it's been around for maybe since 2017. But all iPhones and Androids have had this probably since about 2017. So they've had it for the last few years. And you can turn this on. And then
It's off. However, you can turn on the feature.
oh, the default off. But you can turn the feature on manually. And what this feature does, what this technology does, is that it allows you to have a conversation in real time where speech is turned into text or sound is turned into text. You can share films. You can show videos. And so whether you're using an iPhone or an Android, you would have access to this. You just have to go into your settings and click accessibility menu, and you should be able to see TTY/real-time text. Click it, turn it on, and you'll see different options become available to you when you're making phone calls or making a call. And so this technology is something that has been developed and is continuing to be developed, and it provides more flexibility for people to communicate with different modalities in the same situation. So they're not stuck to just one modality in any given situation. They have the option to transition between modalities within the same conversation. Next slide, please. Jane, did you want to talk about this slide?
You know, I think we already did this. This sort of got stuck in there as extra. So let's go on to the next one. Yeah.
Okay. So for sign language interpreters, again, this falls under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was signed in 1990. And for private companies who have more than 16 employees, they are required to provide sign language interpreters or another reasonable accommodation. So CART, or the real-time captioning, would be something that would be a reasonable accommodation if perhaps interpreters weren't available. So in the past, people with disabilities were required to pay for interpreters themselves, which is now not allowed under federal law. Under federal law, it is the company that is now required to provide for interpreting, for equal access. It's more equitable. Government services are required to provide interpreters. Any kind of government or public company is required, so that the public has the same or equal access to the services that any other person might have.
One more slide, please. Let's find a deaf-blind slide. Accessibility for deaf-blind communication. Yes, this is the one. So one of our newest servicers, which we're going to close and wrap up our presentation today with, is the one providing community accessibility for deaf-blind communication, our community members who find themselves deaf-blind. And video relay services and such are not accessible to individuals who are deaf-blind. So we are providing communication facilitation services. And what that looks like is we have specially trained individuals who understand both tactile sign language and pro-tactile sign language, which you saw a video on earlier towards the beginning of the presentation, that can go to the deaf-blind person's home to facilitate communication in terms of phone call services in particular. We started this in 2021. Like I said, this is a new service, and we had about 60 appointments during that first year, and now we are tracking to have over 600 this year. So it is a very popular and well-used service. We are also giving out a special app called My MMX, which can be used on a laptop and basically allows a person with low vision to modify videos to increase the contrast, change colors, zoom in, zoom out as needed. It allows some flexibility for adding access to videos on their own laptop type computers. Next slide, please, which I believe is our final one. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. I know that we kind of went right to the very end, and if there are questions, please reach out to us and we'll try and get those questions if from the chat and get those answered in time too. So thanks so much for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Julie, I don't know if you want to say anything. Glad it was good information and helpful. Great.
No, thank you all so much. Especially big shout out to Tina and Erin, David and Jane. This was so informative. We will be following up with the slide deck. The recording of this session will be available on YouTube, and we encourage you to register for the remaining sessions in this series. So hopefully we'll see you again soon. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, David.